Hi everybody, my name is Madison Griffith and my presentation is the intersection of media and women's representation. The topic I chose to use for my presentation is how mass media and esoteric forms of persuasion represent women within society, specifically regarding social media. This topic interests me because I have taken many women and gender studies classes that have explored media relating to women and the stereotypes that follow. However, I find it particularly interesting to explore with persuasion in mind because I know how much media affects women and societal expectations, and finding the persuasive tactics that help employ this narrative is very intriguing. My first slide looks at the dual process of persuasion when looking at the representation of women on social media platforms. According to one of my articles, across social media platforms, women are generally portrayed more negatively in both overt displays of objectification and more subtle social cues of lower competency and respect, such as referring to candidates who are men by their last name and candidates who are women by their first name. This helps reinforce that there are subtle cues and very overt cues when looking at the types of forms that are being presented on social media. And this is where the dual process of persuasion comes in. We have the elaboration likelihood method and the heuristic systematic model. The elaboration likelihood method has a central root and a peripheral root, and the central root is something that needs to be thinking more of the content of the message that's being relayed to the person, and the peripheral root focuses more on the cues that aren't directly related to the substance of the message being presented. The systematic processing focuses more on a thoughtful and deliberate way, which is comparable to the central processing, and the heuristic processing relies more on a mental shortcut, which is comparable to the peripheral processing. Both of these can be simultaneous, but which route they are taken depends on two things: motivation and their ability. So how high or how low is someone's involvement to be motivated into the material that they're getting, or the ability to think about what they're receiving. This is important to consider when looking at the different forms of representation that are throughout many platforms. According to my article, on platforms such as Twitter, there are consistent occurrences of hostile sexism, with about 7% of tweets women typically receive being problematic or abusive. So this helps us reinforce again that there are social media sites that will consistently reinforce the idea that the way we are getting our persuasive messages is either in the ELM or HSM, central, peripheral, systematic, or heuristic. This is examples of dual persuasion. To the left, we have an ELM model, which focuses more on central processing, and these images are of a Get Perfect Body YouTube video, the ID female body type TikTok video, and How to Make Bad Skin Flawless YouTube video. And these are considered central processing because they are longer and it takes more of the viewer's involvement and cognition to understand what is being portrayed throughout the video to gain the final message. And to the right, we have an HSM model, which focuses more on heuristic processing. And in that, you can see an image of a woman who has lost weight for a dieting pill, a woman that has heavily photoshopped herself, and then you see her real image. In the photoshopped image, her waist is taken in, her face is different, and her hair is longer. And underneath that, there's a photo of a model, and her face is airbrushed and perfect in one, and in the other, she does have blemishes and acne. This follows more under a heuristic process because it doesn't require much thinking. It just is something that you look at and you can put two and two together. A study was conducted at Florida University by a psychology doctoral student and professor. The participants included 2,475 undergraduate students. They concluded that 1 in 3 women say they edit images to change their weight or body shape before posting them. These behaviors can lead to low self-esteem in both women and teens. Gender differences and how to analyze your audience is something very important to look at when looking at social media platforms. Gender is a major factor in targeted advertising on social media, and it's also a major factor in recommender functions, delivering different content to males and females. And in this sense, it's basically reinforcing or even amplifying gender stereotypes that we see. When you look at Chapter 5 of the Gas Insider text, we talk about the double bind effect, which is when women must perform better than men to be considered equally competent. And when they don't, they're perceived in a negative way. This is reinforced when you look at social media and what is being shown. We also look at the cross-sex effect and Cody's argument, which is again helping us reinforce the idea that women are seen in negative views compared to men, and because there is such a vast larger number of representation of men than women, women often think that men are the standard, and so we don't have a lot of representation for women, and this reinforces a negative connotation of them. When you look at your audience, you should think of the situation, mindset, or demographics, and this kind of goes back to what I talked about at the beginning, where a lot of platforms will have a for you page or functions that allow them to edit what you see to align more with what you think, and still in those there is so many misrepresentations of women seen in that. My article stated that whether it is primetime television in which there are 3 times as many white men as women, or children's programming in which males outnumber females by 2 to 1, or newscasts in which women make up 16% of newscasters, and in which stories about men are included 10 times more often than ones about women, media misrepresent actual proportions of men and women in the population. The constant distortion tempts us to believe that there really are more men than women, and further, that men are the cultural standard, which basically helps me reinforce what I just talked about when looking at gender differences in the audience. When you're looking at a viewer's attitude, it's really important to know what kind of attitude they have, because that allows you to understand their behavior, especially when looking at social media platforms. According to Chapter 3 of the Gas Insiders text, a viewer's attitude is a psychological tendency that is expressed by evaluating a particular entity with some kind of degree of favor or disdain. And this allows us to help use their attitude as a mental map to guide us depending on what behavior they're going to have. It's really important to understand and perceive a message. If a person doesn't understand and perceive a message, they're not going to be persuaded by it. And it's also important to consider some key aspects of an attitude. We have tendencies and predispositions, evaluative dimensions, and attitude objects that allow us to form our own beliefs and opinions, which then help us make our behaviors towards certain things, as well as looking at the persistence of attitudes, which is that attitudes are malleable and changeable over time, but they are formed through central processing, which goes back to the dual process method. And when you're looking at this, it allows us to see why people buy into the fact of the misrepresentation of women, especially being sexualized or objectified. On the right of my screen, I have 2 images. One is of a few things women are called and a few facts. And at the bottom of that is an image of a woman looking at herself in the mirror, kind of nitpicking all of these things that she doesn't see because she sees social media and she's not aligning with the misrepresentation that is being shown. My article says exposure to sexualized media has been theorized to be an exogenous risk factor in the internalization of sexualized beliefs about women, as well as one of the pathways to the internalization of cultural appearance ideals. Daily exposition to sexualized media content has been consistently linked to several negative effects. Specifically, it has been found to lead to higher levels of body dissatisfaction and distorted attitudes about eatings through the internalization of cultural body ideals, which helps reinforce the idea that a viewer's attitude is being formed based on the persuasive messages that they are seeing on social media. Conformity is another big factor that affects the persuasiveness of misrepresentation of women in social media. According to Chapter 6 of the Gas Insider text, the social proof theory is the tendency to view behaviors as more appropriate or correct when a lot of other people are engaging in such behaviors. And it's also important to consider the conformity variables such as group size, informative influence, normative influence, security in numbers, indoctrination, moral conviction, identification, sex differences, peer pressure, personality, culture, so on and so forth. So basically the demographics of a group that is being able to be conformed. And oftentimes when we look on social media, we see a lot of misrepresentation of women, but because so many people have idealized and desensitized this normalcy of what a woman should be, such as the objectification or sexualization of women, a lot of people just go with it and they conform to those standards. I think when you ask people individually, they might not necessarily agree with, let's say, the ideal beauty standard of a woman, but because so many other people think this is what the standard is, they might internalize that and still believe that on some level. According to my article, it says heavy media use may further the belief in gender stereotypes and has been found to be linked to a stronger endorsement of traditional gender roles and norms, which in turn may be linked to a vast number of determinable health effects. In women, adherence and internalization of traditional gender roles have been linked to greater symptoms of depression and anxiety, a higher likelihood of developing eating disorders, and low self-esteem and self-efficiency. To my right, I have a photo of the media landscape, and it shows different statistics of the percentage of men and women in media. We have an evening broadcast with 65% of men and only 35% of women being represented. We have the print, which is 63% of men and 37% of women. The internet, which is only 60% and 40% women. And wires, which is 65% and only 35% of women. It's important to look at the effects and significance of the misrepresentation of women in social media, and the biggest one is mental health. On my image to the right, it shows a bunch of statistics of mental health of women in media. According to NHS, data shows 68% rise in hospital admissions because of self-harm among girls under 17 in the past decade. 66% feel pressured by society to look a certain way. 67% feel negatively about themselves after seeing an image of the ideal body type. 55% feel bad about themselves after going on social media. And 67% of women feel better about themselves after receiving a large amount of likes. According to my article, more time spent on social media is associated with an increase in depressive symptoms for both boys and girls, but the effect is larger in girls. Factors include lack of high-quality sleep, online harassment, low self-esteem, and negative body image. It also stated girls and women are more likely to experience sexual and gender-based abuse on social media, including image-based abuse. This just reinforces the fact that the misrepresentation being shown on social media of women is starting to affect a lot of people, and it is persuading people to believe these negative connotations. A few ways that we could counteract this is with more mental health awareness or more body positivity, especially to the younger generation, since it is seeming to affect them more and more every day. This is my conclusion slide. Mass media, such as social media, play a part in the persuasion used to form the misrepresentation of women in society. The audience is a key aspect when looking at this topic, depending on the situation, demographic, and other variables. Gender differences, attitudes, and conformity all act as a form of topic used within mass media that aids in the persuasion of how women are represented within society, usually in a negative light, while using these factors to gain complete compliance to a specific target. The dual process of a message plays a pivotal role in persuasion used in mass media such as social media, as it helps gain the viewer's thought process while creating a message tailored to them. Mass media and forms of esoteric like social media exhibit a certain narrative portrayed of women through persuasive techniques that can be seen in a variety of ways, like these concepts listed above. And here's my reference slide. Thank you.